Join me on the next episode of Sound Stories, where I talk about one of the best heavy rock bands of the last 30 years, Sevendust. Hey everybody, welcome back to Sound Stories with Byron Nash. I'm your host, Byron Nash. This is episode number 12, and it's about one of my favorite bands of all time, Atlanta's own Sevendust. You know, I wanted to approach this episode a little differently, where usually I go through all the facts and things like that, and I'm going to talk about some things about that, but really I want to talk about their influence, and I don't think they get mentioned enough. I think they added a flavor to heavy music and heavy rock that wasn't quite there at the time when they came out in '97. My history with Sevendust goes back to that time when I was fortunate enough to be able to interview them. I just feel like, they were one of the most influential bands of the early 2000s, came out in '97. They had the single Black, crushing, but they also had something really unique that was different. I think the most obvious would be LJ, and Lajon Witherspoon would be his voice. I mean, soulful, just deeply soulful and heartfelt, strong, powerful vocals, but he also knew how to rip it up. And there was like this masculine aggressiveness, but then there was also a tenderness, talking about feelings and things like that, and the way that they fused together. And then how the drummer Morgan would have sort of like the counterpoint rhythms, the backing vocals that would be in between. And that was really unique to their sound. I thought another element that made them stand out to me was there was a use of kind of like electronic meets synth drum programming that would be either intros or outros or breaks or little transitions to get to different parts. And that was a really unique thing for that style of music back then. But when I lucked out and got to meet them, it was interesting because it was 1999. I had just started working at the magazine, and I was interviewing bands, and I was kind of coming up in the ranks at this point. At this point, I'm like really starting to interview some awesome groups. And the Warped Tour was coming through, and Sevendust was on it. And at that time, usually that was sort of like a power punk pop thing, alternative, Tony Hawk style, groups and stuff, video game groups. But Sevendust was on there, and I thought they were kind of the most metal group of the lineup. I mean, that year it had suicidal tendencies on there, but it had Sublime, the version of Sublime post Bradley. I think the Luna Chicks, Blink 182. I mean, they were already hot. Blink was hot, and they were slaying. But this was right before they went from like Warped Tour big to Arena big and like MTV super huge. So it was a really interesting time for music. I thought there were so many cool things going on. And for Sevendust to be on that show, I was like, yes. So I had an interview set up with Lajon. And I'm not even sure how it happened, but let me tell you guys, like, it was super cool. That was probably my first real experience where I got to watch a band and several bands from the side stage, like on the stage. So I got to watch Suicidal, Blink, and I'll share the photos where you can see my perspective. Like, there's Travis drumming, and then there's a sea of people out there. So being able to see Sevendust in the early days on stage with them, just destroying it. And I was like, oh, this is one of the best bands out right now. So afterwards, I got to interview John, and he really took his time with me. And like, we didn't do the typical interview on the tour bus, and we didn't do the standard thing where you're kind of just running through the questions. I really wanted to know more about them. But at that point in my interviewing career, I wanted to learn about the actual people in the bands, not just like all the things that you want to read in the press. Like, you can get that anywhere. I wasn't interested in that. I was interested as a fan, and I wanted to report as a fan for the fans. And so back in the day, there was a venue called Icy Light Amphitheater here in Pittsburgh. It's kind of like right on the river. It was just a big like canopy tent, and then they would have like the whole tour would come through and set up concerts underneath that. But underneath the bridge, that's where a lot of the tour buses would be. So we went and we walked through all the tour buses and sat on a wall and did the interview. And I was asking him about, their origin and like being from Atlanta. And he was telling me things about how they didn't have a lot of support in at home, and they had to really go outside of Atlanta, outside of Georgia, to really get recognized before things started moving with the first album. And obviously, Lajon being black, me being black, and being into rock, especially then. So hopefully, this doesn't become a clip that makes it about other things, because that's not what my point is. My point is, then I was really curious, like what that was like for him, because he still kind of stood out. It reminded me of how Living Color stood out and things like that. And so we talked about those really personal things. But I remember asking him one specific question that really stood out to me, which was, how do you maintain your family life when you're on the road for a year and a half? And he was like, well, think of it like this. If you're like not at home for like a couple of days, things get a little unruly. If you're gone for like 2 weeks, like you come back and you haven't been there, and your things are a little disheveled. He's like, now imagine being gone for a year and a half. He's like, you come back and things are like effed up. And I really thought about that, like, because at that time I wanted to start a band and eventually get signed and do all the things. But there's a side to being an artist that people who aren't artists don't know, and people who aren't touring artists definitely don't know, which is being away from your family, living with the road crew and the managers and your bandmates, and dealing with people's personalities, dealing with addiction, dealing with never being in the same place for more than like a day. Weird sleeping conditions, hotels, not getting paid, all that stuff like is baked into it. And so while at that time it still was very much so glamorized, you didn't have the access to artists the same way that you do now, where you can know what they have for breakfast and see them in their living room. Like there was a big separation, and there was still like a star power, star quality of not knowing and having that access, which in some ways I think was a little cooler. I like what we have now, but I remember the mystique of it back then, really having a power on how much, your band or your artist could be something you gravitated to and made it your own. So I remember that. And after the interview, like we really connected, and say, I'm trying to do this journalism thing, and I'm just going to be interviewing bands, and I really appreciate your time. And he the only photo I have of him was him holding my business card. And he's like, we're going to do this shit. Like, don't stop, keep going. And I don't know if Lajon knows this, but that little space and time and those words of encouragement, I mean, that's what got me to where I am today. Like, it really inspired me to put my head down and stay the course and not give up and continue to play and have some grit and have some endurance to, signing up for a life of music, and what that meant as a musician. So I have this really cool picture. I'll put it up where it's like him holding my business card. And that like always just really struck a chord, with me as well. Every time they came back since then, I was able to like link up with them. And I remember like they were back in like 2000, and we had Nick Acosta had Everybody's Got Their Something out, super funky record, super hot. And I don't know how we ended up talking about her backstage, but he and I had like this crush on her, like this musical kind of crush, and we were like really geeking out over Nick Acosta. That's one of my more fond memories of hanging out with LJ. And then like I got to hang out with the other guys. I didn't get to know them as well, but like during that time, every time they would come, I would luck out and be able to have access. And then one of the last times we hung out, it was like a weird gig where they were at it was like a Catholic college, maybe an hour outside of Pittsburgh. And so I went out there. They were opening for Fuel. They had that really big song, like Hemorrhage or something like that. And got to hang out with them there, and they crushed it. And it was just an awesome thing to kind of watch their development and trajectory over time. I love Home. I love Animosity, super. I really got into that record. That record crushes. But they were just here about a month ago in May. Incredible concert. I mean, that whole tour was stacked with, like, every band was great, but it was really nice to see them where they are now and still going at it. And I know there was some talk. I know Morgan had mentioned that they were thinking about calling quits and hanging it up, because it's hard being in a band. And it's definitely hard being in a band that plays heavy music, for a long time. And, you're just trying to chug away at it, and then you got to be on the road, and it disrupts your personal life and all those things that come along with it. So I'm really happy that they pushed through and released an awesome record, one. So if you haven't gotten it yet, get out there, download it, buy it on vinyl, support the band. And remember, like, I'm not, I don't work for Sevendust, so I'm just pushing it because I'm a fan. But remember, like, our support to these artists is what keeps these artists making music. So it's more than just a stream, and it's more than just a like. It's like, get out there, see the groups, buy the t-shirts, do the meet and greets, all those different things that didn't actually exist before. You didn't really have, if you got meet and greets, it's because you were really hooked up. But yeah, if you got to pay for it, it's probably because it's helping feed their kids and put them through college. So, and if you're in that same position, you probably want to do the same thing. I'm really grateful to Sevendust as a band and what they contributed to that style of music, because the early 2000s was going through an interesting metamorphosis with heavy music, and then you had the kind of boy band stuff still happening, and pop was doing its thing, but rap and hip hop was doing its thing, and it was MTV was still really important, and TRL was really big and could make or break an artist. So for them to create that music that, I mean, they're heavy. That's a heavy band. When they played Woodstock, what was it? Was it 99 or 2000? One of those two? I was so happy that group was on there, but to, I don't know how to describe it. There's something that's really unique about them. They don't have a lot of solos, even though the guitar players are good enough to play solos and shred it up, Clinton, John. But I like how they're, like, sonically textured with, like, chordal things. I think that's really cool about what they do. And their riffs are, like, they're kind of funky. Like, they have, like, a street bob to them. They have a soul and grit that not all the bands had like that back then. And then some of the ones that did, I felt like everyone was starting to have the same sound. And I always thought the Sevendust stood out for that reason. It was like their grooves were heavier, their breakdowns were crazy, and the drumming is out of this world. So a lot of shuffle beats, cool patterns, a hip hop sort of sensibility to the drums. And I always thought, when you have hip hop drums and you got heavy guitars, it's just a recipe made for greatness. I guess that's really all I wanted to do, was say, like, Sevendust freaking rocks. And if you're unfamiliar, get familiar. Go back in time, start with the first record. And I mean, they have such a long history, but Home and Animosity really stand out as my personal favorites. And I also have the box set that has, like, the acoustic stuff too, which is really great. That's it for this episode of Sound Stories. I'm going to do a little Sevendusty jamming at the end. And then the next episode, I'm going to switch it up a little bit, because I've been noticing something happening online, and I've been thinking about it. And it's going to be on the topic of AI and music. Not necessarily, do you hate it? Do you not hate it? I don't really want to get into that debate, because, do what you want to do. But what I'm not into is people stealing other people's guitar stuff and then posting it online and claiming it as theirs. I mean, I actually fell for a few of these things where I'm like, man, that girl shreds. And then, you look at the fingers and it's not right. And I'm only saying girl because it was very specific to this particular video, that it was, some hot girl playing guitar. And I was like, oh, sounds really good. And then it wasn't real. So I want to talk about that in the next episode. But for now, plug in, put on your Sevendust, and get your jam on. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. My name is Byron Nash. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Thank you for your patience. I had a little vacation and a little break in between episodes, but I'm back up and running, and I'm ready to rock out all summer with you. So thank you for tuning in. Peace.